This is my 84th trip to Romania in just 10 years. Romania One, if I were to summarize it, I would say Romania One is helping the people in Romania to understand their rights and to assume their responsibilities. Because in a democracy, it is the responsibility of people from the bottom up to come up with solutions in the towns that they live. It's their responsibility to work in groups, to do their work publicly, and to do it with respect. And so we are, when I hear people say democracy's failed in Romania, my instinct is, well, it still hasn't yet been tried, and that Romania One is going to try to empower that.
You know, my impression in Romania, that just in a very superficial level, is the fundamental problem is that the way that politics works here, it's very clientelistic. It's a very clientelistic type of society based on kind of personal relationships where the state is used to kind of organize power in some sense rather than provide public goods. It's used to deliver rewards and favors to political supporters, and so that, you know, the state needs to be fundamentally transformed from a clientelistic one to a different type of state. So how do you do that? Well, you know, one way is you have to impose basic types of rules within the state on the way contracts are given, the way people are hired, the way people are promoted. You know, so you know, it could well be that, you know, so I think, you know, going back to what Don said, you know, I'm sure there's very good laws about this. It's probably they're just not implemented. So, and that's a political issue. You know, this is not something that some economist from Harvard or political scientist from Harvard can tell you how to fix. You know, it's not that this is broken and nobody noticed. It's broken for a very good reason, you know, for a political reason. So you can't expect the politicians to change this because it's working to their advantage. So that's something that society has to change, to organize, to demand change, to force the politicians to be accountable and implement change. So I think, you know, when you ask about what's one thing that Romania can do, this is not a process of, like, you know, identifying some little problem and, you know, this is I'm sure it's obvious to lots of Romanians what the problems are, but changing that needs organisation, it needs political change, it needs a change in the way politics works, and, you know, that's what you need to transform a clientelistic state into a non-clientelistic state and get rules applied, and so you know, and I think once you do that, then everything will sort itself out. Not everything, but most things will sort itself out. So,
can I give you an answer to that question?
Yeah.
I think it's telling when Senator John McCain came to Romania last week. What's the one thing he wanted to do? Can anyone tell you the most important thing he did in Romania? He went to the Department of Anti-Corruption. 875 convictions last year. It hasn't happened anywhere in the world. It's stunning. It is a stunning success. And that's what he wanted to hear about. Senator Chris Murphy, when he came, he wanted to hear about this miracle, that a country could have an anti-corruption department that level of success. There's a major report that came out last week in the United States. In fact, I'm going to show the cover at my talk tonight, which is the greatest threat to international security is corruption. Because if the people of their country, like in Romania, if 92% of the people in this country don't like the government, 80% of young people want to leave, that isn't a reliable ally for anybody. And so, you know, I know it's hard in the media, but news is not found on Antenna 3 in this country. There ought to be a TV show called This Week in the DNA. That is the best news in this country, and it's what people in America, that's what's bringing them here. This is a stunning success. So that's an institution which is a legal institution. You asked for one, I'm going to give you two. The second institution is civil society, which is an education, is that Romanian politicians are not any different than American. American politicians spend most of their time raising money and politicking to get on committee. They have no time to think about solutions. And they're not bad people necessarily. That's not their role. In America, it is the role of civil society to find solutions, Sometimes those solutions are actually proposed by the civil society. When drunk driving deaths in America, all of the laws in all the states came from Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It was a group of people who said, we need to find a way to deal with this issue. So MAD, it's called, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, came up with all the laws in all the states and solved it. Many of the laws that do get passed in Washington, I mean, if for those of you who've been to Washington, the number of buildings that belong to the U.S. government is very small. The number that belong to the 5,000 think tanks in Washington who come up with solutions and propose laws and inform politicians is a lot. And so what Romania One is about building a civil society. It begins with people knowing here's what your rights are, and then this is your responsibility. We didn't become European citizens the day we joined the EU. We become citizens when we understand what our rights, our responsibilities are. And we can't complain about politicians. We need to give them the answers.
The event that created modern economic growth and all this prosperity in the modern world, which we never saw historically until the last 200 years, is the Industrial Revolution, which started in England and then it spread fast to Western Europe, it spread fast to North America, it never spread to Eastern Europe until very recently, didn't spread to Latin America, didn't spread to Sub-Saharan Africa. So what was the Industrial Revolution? The Industrial Revolution was a whole series of technological innovations. It was mechanization of cotton, spinning and weaving. It was the factory system, new ways of organizing, new methods of power, steam engine, new methods of transportation, the railway. And where did all these things come from? Well, innovators, inventors, people invented them. Richard Arkwright invented the factory system. James Watt perfected the steam engine. A whole bunch of people developed mechanized weaving and spinning. And if you ask, who were these people? Where did they come from? You see something really interesting, which is they came from all over the social spectrum, all over society. They were not elites, they were not aristocrats. A couple of them were, but most of them were farmers, artisans, ordinary people, professional people, So talent, ideas, skill, entrepreneurship, creativity, that's absolutely crucial to having innovation, to having a dynamic, economic, successful society. But that energy, that creativity, that's spread all over society. You don't know where it is. The government doesn't know where it is. No one knows where it is. And you have to set up a kind of set of institutions, of rules in society that can tap into all of that talent, that can harness that talent, that can allow talent and energy and creativity to come to the top, let people do their thing. And that's why inclusion is so important. You have to have a way of including people in society, to tapping into all that latent talent and energy, and that's what the United States managed to set up. That's what every, society has managed to set up. That's even what the Chinese have managed to do in a very imperfect way since the late 1970s, in an imperfect and unsustainable way, I'd say. But the success of China is not due to the Communist Party. It's the opposite of that, actually. The success of China is due to the Communist Party stopping trying to control every single aspect of people's lives and kind of withdrawing from the society, withdrawing from the economy, withdrawing from production, and allowing people to do their thing. So I would say that's not a sustainable, the way the Chinese are doing it is not sustainable, but the economic success that's there has been exactly because they've let this happen. So I think inclusion is important because there's so much potential in society in Romania, and in poor countries that potential is not realized because most people are just excluded from opportunities by monopolies, by favoritism, by barriers to entry, by lack of education, by insecurity of property rights, by insecurity of human rights, and this is where this word inclusion comes from, and that's why it's so important.
Romania, when I looked 2 years ago, ranked last of all the countries in Europe in the World Bank's doing business rankings. So they rank how easy it is to operate a small business in Romania, and they rank it based on the number of tax payments you need to make a year, the number of days to get construction permits, the number of days to get electricity, the length of time to get a judicial decision on a lawsuit, the ease of bankruptcy. Romania's last. And
from the European Union?
in all 27 countries, the hardest. And so if you want to keep the best minds in Romania with the best ideas to say, I'm going to start my, whatever it is, my Skype in Romania, it has to change. This has to be an easy place to start a business. Tax payment, it can't be, at one point there was 113 tax payments a year that a small business had to make. Most were in person. We need to get to the point where there's like 15 and they're all electronic. But that's a great report because it takes this inclusiveness that James says, well, so let's incent people to stay here, make it easy for them to start their enterprises. And that's a great way of saying, well, what do we do next?